Let's get to the panel discussion. Leading our discussion today, we have our very own Anthony Cook, which you've heard from earlier. This time he's taken the role of moderator, guiding the conversation and making sure we all get the most out of our expert panel. Joining us again, we're pleased to welcome back Adam Mullett from IBM and John Kirkman from ETP, who you're excited to hear more from. Feel free to jump up to the panel seats. Same yourself, Anthony. And for the two new panelists that are joining us, we have Carl Smith, which gentleman over there. He's a Perth-based technology specialist with an extensive experience in solutions delivery for the mining sector. Over the years, he's worked with leading technologies such as Siemens, Hexagon, and Micromine, helping operations drive optimization through technology. For the past 4 years, Carl has been working as the National Account Director at Intelligence.io, an AI and machine learning-focused mining software company. His expertise lies in building long-term partnerships and ensuring mining operations successfully integrate with cutting-edge solutions. Our final panelist is Bryce Gower, co-founder and CEO of Augment Technologies. Since founding the company in 2018, Bryce has been leading a team of AI developers to tackle a long-standing challenge that's plagued open-cut mining, ore loss and dilution from blast movements. What started as a 4-year-long collaboration with First Quantum's copper mines has since grown into a global solution, with deployments at gold operations like Northern Star, African PMG sites, and even as far as the Arctic Circle. Today, he heads up a team that includes geologists focused on implementing and supporting their muck pile block model solution, helping operations worldwide improve accuracy and efficiency. With that, we have an incredible lineup of panelists. Anthony, please take it away.
I'd just like to give a bit of context setting for this discussion. As you can see, it's about common pitfalls in data, and there is an aspect to it which is the introduction of AI. But don't worry, this isn't going to be a technical talk. That's not the goal of this. When we talk about AI, what we're really talking about is the cutting-edge, data-intensive technology that's available today, but perhaps not accessible because of the data that you have. So what we're really wanting to understand is, how do we know that we're data ready? How do we know that we're data appropriate? And to use some of the common terminology in the industry, the data science usually uses the V's, which are volume, variety, and velocity of data. These are the things that you need to be able to get the most out of your AI techniques or any data-intensive technique. But another one that I'd like to add to that list is validity. Is the data valid, which is a big challenge in mining, and how do we ensure that, again, we're ready to use these data tools? So I'll lead the discussion through a general flow, but this will be sort of our own notebook LM discussion. This is a fireside chat. It's not an interview. I'd hate to be standing here and just asking questions and getting single responses. So although I may ask one of you in particular a question, I would very much like to hear from others of you as well. So let's keep it open. I know, Adam, you've got experience with these through the Snowden Optiro podcasts. And yeah, let's just have a discussion. So the first thing that I'd like to ask about is the current state of data in mining. So we're not a extremely digitized environment. We're not ultra technical or born from technology. So maybe, Carl, a question for you. In your experience, what are the most critical data challenges, be they volume, variety, or velocity, that miners face when starting these data-intensive initiatives?
Yeah, look, no, thanks for that. I think, if we focus on any miners I talk to, one of the first comments is that data is terrible. That it's terrible. There's nothing you're going to be able to do with this. And I think it's stepping back from that and actually getting in there and understanding and helping them understand that there is quality in that data. You're never going to have a utopia where everything's perfect and start your digital journey or your AI journey then. It's really important to assess what you have and actually work with partners, vendors, to do an analysis and almost like understand up front where you are, and then actually come up with some suggested improvements and work through those. But I will say that, new techniques like new technology like AI and machine learning is able to make good use of the data that's already there and find insights and actually help clean it up, if you like. So applying it to the models, actually finding correlations that were never there before, that you never thought were there. In my experience, that actually you can do a lot with what you have.
Yeah,
so that would be my comment on that.
Anyone else would like to chime in on that one?
I like the 5 V's you mentioned, but there's actually a 6th one that we look for a lot, which is veracity. So a lot of single small mines don't actually have the breadth of data required to build the kind of solution they really need. And even if you look at tier 1 groups with lots of mines, they kind of don't have that volume either. So that's where we see domain experts that can serve the entire global mining industry. They stand to bring together so much more variety of data on the same problem to truly understand it in the scope required to produce the value I think we're all chasing.
Do you think maybe we've got too much variety of data?
Well, there's imprecision and then there's variety, right? So, for example, we modeled blasting, right? And I remember we modeled this one and we were validated so tightly on so many aspects of it. And when we got a really, really good score, really accurate modeling, it wasn't celebration. The question was, is it going to work on the next one? And, oh, this one's got more oxidized ore, or hang on, we're doing a cutback over here. And it's this never-ending question, right? And I think that's exactly where variety comes in. Is you have to have really gotten across the breadth of the whole problem to know that the narrow focus you're looking at is appropriate.
Yeah, excellent. So it's a good point for sure. And talking about things like variety with quality and validation, Adam, I've actually got one here for you. And could you share an example where data quality, or perhaps lack thereof, made or broke a data project, AI or otherwise?
Well, that's probably most of them, right? I have many stories about this, but generally, what I'd say is it's usually when people get a bit overexcited about what they can get out of the data. It's not that the data couldn't be used for anything. It's just that it's not useful for the thing that they thought it was. And so maybe it's time to, if you're in that position where you've started a project or you've started an analysis and the data's not really working, take a step back, think about what else you could do. But yeah, in terms of, that's a very, very, very common thing that happens all the time. 100%.
Anyone else?
I'd like to add to that. I think often in my experience, it's not just the data. And I think I'll probably expand on this theme as we go along. It'd be interesting to hear the other panel members' thoughts, but it's the people. So it's this demystifying technology and, actually making sure that we're solving the right problem. I think, Adam, you were mentioning that earlier, but that's the key thing, is to bring the people on the journey. Yeah. And I guess it's a bit like real estate. It's the 3 most important things for digital project success is the 3 C's, champion, champion, champion. And it's be able to get those people on site. It's okay to have corporate initiatives, and that's really necessary and directive. But you need, in my experience, and I'm sure John, you'll speak to it as well, you need to have that buy-in from site, to have champions that really believe in it. And one of the ways, and I think we've touched on this in some of the excellent presentations, is to have early wins and to demonstrate value that's meaningful. Yeah. So focus on something that's going to demonstrate value. It could be something around, cyanide addition in one part of the circuit to deliver better recovery. Well, if you prove that it can work, the technology can work in that simple area, and bring the people on that journey, as the model is theirs. It's not some black box. I think that's the key thing. So, I'd be interested to hear what you think about the people part of it. John?
100%. You've got to have the right sponsorship and buy-in for all these things. And a lot of it's about also being honest with the stakeholders and the people in the business about the reality of where they are at any point in time. So I think in my presentation, I talked about the first underground mine where we're looking to really focus on that short-term optimization. Some people might call it short interval control or, closed loop scheduling optimization, within the week. But if you have a look at the data, how they capture it right now, at that mine when we started, it was all radio call-ups, much of it after the fact or end of shift. Even for the truck cycles going around, the difference between one person's view of when they're dumping and queuing and was there, I'm going to run algorithms with this type of data input to tell me what the optimal destination for that truck is to go next. kidding yourself. So you're going to need to look at the source of data, the type of data you're trying to collect. You don't have to get everything, but you want to focus on automating it. And automating can have a little bit of inaccuracy, but having it consistent across things about where those changes are, you can leverage that. But I see a lot of executives and that getting excited about some of these technologies that are possible. It actually have been possible to build the algorithms for a very long time, but not having a real understanding of where they are from a data perspective. No network coverage to the face in underground mines. So there's a few riddles that people will have to solve before they can really sort of take those big steps and do what they've been doing in other industries without those challenges for decades now.
There's also the aspect of, just riffing off this, that who's the data being collected for and who has to do the work. So if you've got someone who you're trying to convince on site to collect data and they don't really want to, or it's a distraction, or it's you've given them an iPad because you want to collect something and they're like, well, I don't need the iPad, you're probably going to find it's going to be pretty spotty. The iPad might get smashed pretty quick by accident. So like people do rebel, and if it's not for them, then they're probably not going to play along.
Yeah.
That's it actually reminds me of some work I did for a company a while ago where we were looking at the innovation strategy. And they were looking at technology and innovation, but ultimately, spoilers, it came back to culture and people, and it was who they were doing for. And so underground, they have the scaling bars, or GUI bars, they call them. And there were a few of those that went through the sensors because they just didn't understand who they were doing it for. Why were they digitizing the mine? And it's really, again, champion. It needs to be driven not just top down, but also from the side.
There's a bit of the big brother fear factor as well. Oh, they're watching me because they're putting sensors and technology on the equipment.
I've had sensors being put in, antenna being put inside the engine compartment, and you're going, why have we lost signals to the bogger? Or they put it in. It gets knocked off, or it's been put inside the actual inside the engine compartment. So behavioral things are and that's why you need to bring the team on the journey. They need to go to see what it's in it for them.
So I guess looping back to data, Bryce, a question for you. So your product is an AI product, and it's about building in an extra part of that system. So not just focusing on the product itself, but what immediate benefits have you seen when different data streams, whether they're operations, planning, geology, maintenance, are integrated before coming to site and building the AI solution on top?
So a big part of the way we decided to structure our product when we were looking at a product market fit was that initially we thought we'd train these bespoke models for every site because that way they're custom and they work on everyone's data quality and preferences. But coming back to my point earlier about veracity, what we discovered was that actually the breadth of data was better. And so our current model now is that we go to site with a general model that's already pre-trained, and we do one calibration exercise actually in our sales process before we even close the deal. And that allows us to see if our model is actually accurate on their level of quality, and data cleanliness is essentially the bigger factor. We're talking about garbage in, garbage out. So in our sales process, we're able to basically do that technical due diligence of appropriateness of the modeling accuracy. And it gives us a lot of confidence in delivering that solution then, because as most technology products go through, especially when there's an AI sticker on it, geologists love to validate the hell out of it. And we welcome this because we're science first, and we find that when they try to tear it apart and they can't, that's how you make a champion, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess, Carl, maybe you see the same things?
Very similar. That's right. Go there. You don't try to make it too specific to site. Try to go there with of course, models that are ready to run out of the box, and you're configuring it for that operation. But you're bringing people on that journey that they're helping validate the models, as you said, Bryce. But one thing I guess I would add is that all of us come from different organizations here. One thing that I think really plays well with organizations is when I say that we're all part of an ecosystem. We all work together. Collaboration is actually key for technology deployment. Well, I've certainly had executives, managers tell me when I say we're not here to replace the entire value chain. You already have an ecosystem in place. We want to work with that. And I think that goes to what you do as well, John. That's a really important message. It's about collaboration and openness, open interfaces, the ability to integrate well. I think that's a really important platform for technology adoption.
Do I dare dig up any horror stories you can share with us?
Yeah, look, there are, of course, horror stories where people don't work well together, that there's, proprietary interfaces and information, and it's difficult to get access, and you have to try and find a way to work around that. Yeah. And that's not ideal for the client at the end of the day, where people are protecting their IP, their interfaces, and you do have to find a way around it. Of course, if a client has a well-prepared data lake, as you were discussing earlier, that makes our job a lot easier. Yeah. So we're having one interface with one platform, which is a unified platform. And then we can derive, obviously bring that into our platform. So agreeing with what everybody said today in the presentations.
And John, I know that you had a lot of diagrams of these sort of systems working together. Mm-hmm. In your experience, do you see that companies that embed these data validation practices, do they do it more as a one-off or as a continuous process?
It's a lot of the time when we come into an organisation, you just forget we had the standards for messaging and how to send things around. We're still there trying to solve a problem. So we go through there and understand what bottleneck is, or worse, and focus our architecture and efforts around that. And always is one of the key things we're looking at is the quality of the data that they're getting from their existing systems, how they're capturing it, and one of the things that always annoys, all the data, we want everything. As depending on that's always nice, but not always possible, and you've got to get bang for your buck. So what's the type of data that's critical to make this project a success? How are we capturing that? How are we validating it? And get that right. So often when we do the baseline assessments, and this will be common in underground, TKMs is a massive indicator of performance. They're all just based off survey distances, not the actual distance a truck goes. But this is part of their daily, the underpinning data in mining. People don't really realise day to day, because they're just going through the process they have to every week on their swing, how fundamentally flawed and how much opportunity there is within these businesses. And we've got surveys and we've got trucks that know how far they've travelled, and we're not collecting any of that and using that as an input into our processes. So, there seems to, I suppose, horror stories out there around where it's at that people just don't realise. And there's simple ways you can start to go and fix those things up and address that. And it's about sort of understanding where you are and different layers, not so much technology, but what's the quality of our data? What is our data capture method for this type of data? Is it a person visually looking at things or making up their own mind based off a process and then reporting that in, or is it coming from an actual sensor, or is it being derived from multiple sensors and sensor? Can I validate those locations through Bluetooth or GPS that their operator said they did? Can I validate that they're moving around? And of course, if that stuff's easy and cheap to uplift compared to a lot of the other projects, and as a critical enabler, then that you really need to go into that eyes wide open. And I just don't think those projects really they're not up in lights. They're not the big data, because the big data's up here, and it's the reports and dashboards.
Everyone's chasing their shiny
UI, and not the mechanics of it underneath that sort of empowers it all, So the semantics and interoperability part of what we do doesn't solve that. That's just common, get good quality data that you can validate and check.
And to touch on some of the things you said as well about the quality of the data in mining, I guess, Adam, do you want to give some perspectives from other industries and the differences between mining's data sort of landscape and perhaps some of the other industries that you've worked with?
Sure, yeah. So I've worked in various industries, GIS, health insurance, oil and gas, and each of these industries have different sort of data literacy. but different levels of regulation as well. So if you think about like health insurance, machine learning models that they have in that industry are extremely advanced, and yet they're barely able to use them because just because you've been able to, to use an example that we looked at, a real one at the time. This is going back some years now. If a woman has had a stillbirth, what do we want to derive about her likelihood to cancel their membership, right? Because there is a strong correlation between those two events. However, from an ethics point of view, how would you use that? How would you govern that? Do you allow that person to then take that piece of information that, we know that this person is likely to cancel their membership, and then put it into our marketing engine? It doesn't pass the sniff test. So that's an interesting example, I think. There's all, then when you think about oil and gas is up to its eyeballs in sensors, right? But they've got their own problems around things like they'll have equipment that was put in 45 years ago that doesn't need replacing because it just works. It was built to last. And there's examples where, you talk about sensors and how do you capture data. We've been involved in things like people said, "Oh, can we digitize this gauge to give us this pressure on this valve?" And we said, "No, you can't because it's too expensive. How about we just point a webcam, like $100 webcam at it, so you can always see what the data is, and use artificial intelligence to actually digitize that by looking at the gauge and give you a digitized number." Cool, that works. So like there's different. I can't remember where I was going with this, but there's all sorts of different things going on in different industries, right? And GIS is really fascinating as well. The level of data literacy in that industry is off the charts, but probably people don't understand what that industry is really good at and how it can be used.
So where would you rank mining compared to some of those as far as quality of data, volume, veracity?
Well, I think the overwhelming consensus is the quality in mining is not that good. But, if you look at like geology, there's really interesting analysis done. It's really deep, really specific. But I don't know, it's such a fine point in the process. If you look at, some of the other things that we're doing around, artificial intelligence, how do we get 10,000 people's safety, when they do their safety observations, how do we predict what the next safety incident might be off the back of that? Because, we're able to say, all right, here's 10,000 people reporting every single day around, hazards, around, potential, slips, trips and falls, that sort of thing. So from an AI perspective, that can be really interesting. It can also be really hard to get right. If you want to cut through all the acronyms that are used in different industries, AI doesn't do that very well.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to dial back from AI for just a second, I guess, sorry, everyone. I guess in the mining industry, when we talk about AI, we're probably using the term AI for the bleeding edge. So when we look at the landscape of AI, that's everything from if-else statements all the way down to deep learning. But usually when we see the AI label, we're talking about deep learning. This is more of a question for the panel. But when deciding whether to adopt AI or stick to more traditional analytics, so everything above that, which factors like cost, risk, or ROI do you think are the most important to consider?
Well, I mean, I think there's a place for all of the above, right? There is absolutely a place for more traditional systems. You can have, obviously, process control systems, advanced process control. I mean, AI is, of course, that ability to be able to use machine learning and actually to be able to simulate, predict the future, and then optimize. So it is a game changer from that point of view. But I think organizations are ready for it if you can explain it and how it can be done. It's not a mystery. It's not a black box. It's not, it is a science. And I think that it is the next step. And the sooner companies get on that journey and actually incrementally roll it out, the better. So I think the timing is now. And one thing I guess I've observed from even conversations today, there is increasing pressure from the investor, the board level, and the C-level of organizations in being asked. I think I had a conversation earlier, what are we doing in AI? Yeah. Because it's such a topical thing in the industry, in the market. So there's actually push and pull. There's actually pull and push maybe coming from the senior executive so organizations need to have some sort of a story or a roadmap in this area.
Yeah.
So I think that's something we're considering. So you can't,
So
it
you
can't
think
be just ignored. It
yeah.
won't go away.
A major driver is the investors' side. So
Yes,
it's
yes.
more of a financial push rather than some of the others, would you say?
Yeah, it's financial from a market sense, but also is that are you competitive? Are you optimized? Is your value chain optimized? What are you doing in that area? Are your competitors going to move ahead of you because they can actually, optimize recovery in their operation compared to a similar size operation? So that it is a competitive advantage if you get it right.
I see a lot of what you're talking about, and I agree about the investor pressure, but it's the wrong way to look at it completely. Your answer earlier when you were explaining what is AI by saying it's a nonlinear multivariate solution is the right way to describe it, because it's a solution. And you should never start with what solution do we want to come up with today, right? You got to start with what are our problems. So where AI should really be considered is what have our longest standing problems been? What are the nuts that no one's been able to crack? And maybe this is that new look at it. And, when we first founded Augment, we didn't go, we're going to make AI solutions, right? I mean, the obvious reality is we liked AI and we really hoped we'd come up with AI solution. But as a business, we looked for complex, high-value problems, right? Those long-standing problems, because that, to me, is really the way this should be structured. And from there, your investment gets justified really nicely, because if it is a long-standing problem, there's probably a really big ROI from investing it. And if it's done properly, like a geologist would, it needs to be validated quite thoroughly and put onto a couple of papers and presented and peer-reviewed, right? So, it should be treated like a science.
Yeah,
Could I,
I agree. I don't think one precludes the other, right? That you do start, that's what I said earlier, that you start with the high value targets that have been an issue forever.
Can I use an analogy to just sort of echo what you just said? The IBM point of view is always to start with the problem first. But I went to Sydney Tools. Have you guys been to that shop? It's I'd never been there. I was like, oh, what's this new shop? Why didn't they call it Perth Tools? And I walked in there. I was like, oh man, look at that. Oh, I wonder what I'm going to do with that. That looks like such a cool tool, because I'm not a tradie, right? But there's so many tools I've never seen before in my life. And you think to yourself, what would you use that for? And I feel like that's what it's like with AI at the moment. You've got this cool tool which I found at the shop, and I have no idea what to apply it to, but I'm going to give it a go until I find something. And my point of view is, I work for a big tech company. And, in that training I gave you before in the presentation, there's one about specifically how do you discover which problems to solve using AI. And the number one recommendation of that training is don't use AI, because most of the time it's expensive. Your problem probably isn't big enough or special enough. Just try to figure it out first before you apply the really, really high-tech solution to it.
It is an interesting one, though, because you're right. We do have investors which say, are you using AI in your industry? And we may look at a mining company and say, well, they own their tenement, they have full control over their deposit, they're not like a shop. Who are their actual competitors? Well, the competitors, as we realize, is actually the investors. And why would an investor invest in this mining company instead of that one? And then the secondary question, why would they invest in the mining industry if they have other industries to invest in it as well? So perhaps there's a seed there where they're asking for AI, but maybe that's not specifically what they're asking for.
Yeah, we have helped quite a few companies with that strategic lens, right? Because I think that AI can be viewed quite myopically, where in reality, if you expand it to robotics too, a lot of problems that we've had mechanical robotic arms for decades, there wasn't that processing, that nonlinear multivariate solution to make the robotics actually cross the barrier. So if you're thinking strictly software, strictly data-driven, you will miss where the big value opportunity is. And I think that's best, again, to, whilst AI is definitely the game changer that'll probably pull everything together, think more broadly about what are these long-standing problems, because all kinds of technology are advancing rapidly thanks to AI at its heart.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just come back a bit let's talk about data governance and collaboration. So, Carl, a question for you. How do you think mining companies and technology providers, how could they collaborate more effectively to ensure data integrity and governance?
Well, I mean, obviously it's really important to have governance in place in the first place and have a data strategy, and so work on that is one of the key platforms for that sort of collaboration. And then look at, once again, we're all working within an ecosystem and make sure that, that your vendors and your internal teams are working collaboratively together to produce that value we all talk about. And so that's a key part of it, right? That governance should be part of the framework. And I think that's fundamental for this kind of success.
So I guess, John, you had a bit of a talk about standards in your presentation. Do you see any other frameworks or standards emerging from managing data in a way that supports advanced analytics in AI?
I suppose I was just focused on a particular area, the operations management process control, and that keeps me busy enough. But in terms of the validation side of things, probably within that, one of the big things is telemetry data of the actual hardware and software and queues and all that stuff, and understanding the health of the overall system. So there's other standards for that, like open telemetry, where you can have a standard way of basically integrating with every server and virtual environment and app and queue, message queue and all this, and understand the performance of the system. I think that's pretty critical to any architecture, because it's about, you can't have any data loss. All right, well you can, but how many tons do you want missing off that stock? How many trucks of so many tons do you want missing from that stockpile? Well, none. So you want all your data. You want 100% data reliability. And so there's different standards for monitoring systems that allow you to understand whether they're processing things well and within limits and those type of things. And with the ISO 95 standards and those type of things, one of the most used dashboards or types of dashboards that from any architecture we go and implement is actually dashboards that show whether people have done their job as part of this integrated workflow and system, which means if the mine engineer didn't publish the grade control blocks but sent them in an email down to the fleet controller and they put them in, and then we start getting movements across from a grade block ID that we know wasn't published out and received in this system, well then we know no grades carrying through with any of those movements. So whatever they're getting in terms of the grade balances in that stockpile is out of whack. And a dashboard that shows that person and the manager that they've missed it, that gets fixed, and then it self-heals once they publish that data through, and then it adjusts itself and fix it up. So all those things sort of lead to data quality, because it's about also not just how that data is being captured, but whether people are doing their jobs. There's always going to be a human element to that throughout all those processes as well. So, yeah.
Great, thanks. Anyone else want to add anything?
Yeah, I guess we do very similar things in Telesense in terms of the modeling. We're always doing continual QA, QC on the data and actually reporting on that, because it's a very important part of the client's experience is understanding where they are. We can alert on that if there's gaps in the information, and we have techniques, of course, using machine learning to fill data gaps as well. So it's being able to address that factor using technology and techniques. But that's a key thing, getting that confidence in the system. I guess not always being a big brother, but that's the thing. When your system, your platform is a historian, and you can see everything that's happened in that mine value chain from, the fleet movements, right down to, to the actual what's happening in the beneficiation circuit and flotation and leaching, what were the recommended set points that we provided through AI, were they adhered to in that shift? We do report on that, because of course, if the operations staff is not making use of the technology or the advice to optimize their circuit, well then it's very hard to improve it, right? So, but it should not be big brother. It should be about helping people do their jobs better.
Yeah, definitely. And implementation can be quite challenging, which actually brings me to another topic. So, and perhaps Bryce, you could comment on this one. What do you think are some of the biggest hurdles in moving from an AI proof of concept to production scale solutions? And how does data shape that transition?
Well, I think broadly for any new product, right, that hurdle is a massive one. And so for a few of the themes we've covered already, a champion is invaluable, but also you've got to have that really well packaged value proposition to make sure the business knows why they're doing it, right? To a point I think we've covered again. So the difference between AI and not AI, I think at this point in time, is the appropriateness of that solution, right? Because there's definitely some products I've seen that have had the AI sticker on the front and they look very nice, but to I think your point with the camera, it's a beautiful analogy, right? There was a much cheaper, more effective solution. So for AI, I think you really have to go towards these values of large amounts of data and the kind of problems that require this balance of intuition and speed of processing. AI solutions at the moment across many different architecture types, from vision algorithms, language models, even to reinforcement learning agents, their specialty is actually that gut feel intuition. If you need a rigid process control system, a PID controller, those technologies are robust and trustworthy. But if you are trying to intuit a grade over an area, then moving into solutions that have that element of instinct and guesswork, that's what neural networks are packaged for. And even in the reporting sense with the kind of intuition large language models are showing, there's some really amazing products out there that are reading tenement data and actually spitting out answers because they read all 200,000 tenement documents across the area, right? So you can kind of really see what good applications of the technology are based on that appropriateness for the technology and its strengths. And I think to cross that proof of concept barrier, that's where the sniff test will rat out, I think, a lot of stickers.
I think as well, when you're in the early stages, you're under control of like most of your variables. So you know which test data you're using. You've got a small group of users that are on the journey with you. You've got a clear value case from your first sponsor and so on. When you expose any product, and particularly AI, because it's generally untested and not ready for production, to a larger group of users, you're just gonna hit more scenarios that you haven't hit before, and people are going to be more skeptical than normal when it's a new product and when it's AI. So there's also the standard things like, are we doing this ethically? Are we, have we considered all the use cases? Is the data, is a product robust? Is the data going to be kept safe? Is someone going to try to mess with it, feed it rubbish to see if it'll give them the right answer and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we touched on it before about showing the value as well. There was a comment earlier about the mineral prospectivity mapping that we're seeing in exploration. And the nice thing about that is that after you drill a target, it's very binary whether it was a good target or not a good target. And I think that kind of thing can help people understand it. But the reason that people could get there is the multivariate nature. It's having all of your data and being able to compare them and get some links between them better than we can as humans, or better than the processes that we have currently. And I guess when we're talking about that, so Adam, another question for you then. At what scale? So we've got juniors, we've got tier ones, we've got consulting. At what scale do you think that AI is appropriate to turn on? And when you do, perhaps the second part of that, how do you educate your team about it?
I think the smaller organizations actually have an advantage here. Like I said, you've got fewer people to talk to. You have far more control. You don't have to convince, in large organizations, you need to convince people to go along with your plan. You have to have, 14 different stakeholder management and change management forums before you can even start. Whereas if you can sort of eyeball each other across the table and know that, this is an experiment, you're probably going to be able to start faster and learn faster. You'll have shorter loops. So I actually think there's a massive advantage. I've worked in large organizations, I do now, right? And I've worked in very, very small organizations. And I find that the small ones, what they lack in scale, they make up for in being nimble. And also being a bit keener about what they're actually trying to do, what they're trying to solve. So I guess the answer is it doesn't really matter, but you're going to have different issues. And I don't think people should be afraid of having a go if they're small.
I think to the points in your presentation, right, it's about being agile, because I think we could talk very broadly about technology adoption in terms of the tier scales, but to be specific about artificial intelligence, you have to have that rapid iteration. And so if they're not willing to adopt your agile method, which goes for billing cycles and validation, yeah, you're definitely not going to get any progress.
Well, I'll give you an example, right? So my wife works for a smaller company, and her boss recently started using ChatGPT, just the off-the-shelf ChatGPT, to do something with their corporate data. In that company, they don't care, right? They don't have the ethics, or they don't have the data governance. If you did that for working for any of our clients or IBM, you'd probably pretty much be sacked on the spot, right? Mm-hmm. Because, that's completely against data governance rules. In that company, it didn't matter, and they're willing to take the chance, right? So if you want to be a bit more risk-seeking, and if you don't care, you can go real fast, and it's actually really cheap. They're paying the $200 a month, subscription. You won't get much from IBM for $200 a month. So it just depends what you want to do and what your risk tolerance is.
Yeah, I know. I agree with that. That the mid-tier and smaller entities, they're quicker moving, and they can make the decision tree is shorter, and you can make an impact much more quickly in general. I would say there are exceptions to that. And often with the tier ones, there is an in-house digital team, very large team, who are doing things their own way. So you've got to fit in with that roadmap as well, so that can incur delays as well. So yeah, small and nimble is often good.
And less bureaucratic, I'm sure.
Less bureaucratic, yes.
Is there some way that you could get around that risk? So you're saying that the smaller companies are faster because they have a larger appetite for risk. Is there another way that a larger company can match their agility and without sacrificing that risk?
Yeah, so this is at the heart of the garage method, right? That I talked about earlier. The tagline is the speed of a startup, but the scale of an enterprise. And basically, what it does is that all the techniques that it brings in is how do we go faster? How do we avoid getting bogged down in the system? So, for example, if you're trying to do something that's got a data impact and you're regulated and there's a cyber impact and you've got lots of users, well, guess what? To start, you're going to need all of those people in the team. You can't. We will refuse to start the work until we have the representative from data, from cyber, from the user group, from our development teams, because. And then that team is encapsulated and sort of hived off and empowered, right? So we say, all right, you 8 to 10 people, you can do whatever the hell you want within this sandbox, knowing that you're all experts in your own domain and you're going to keep each other in check. So you can go off and build something, create that thin slice, that MVP, minimum viable product, and then come back and test that, right? And some of the loose ends that you've got, there won't be many of them because you're all experts, but when you go to scale, then you can have that conversation.
So it's about having an appetite for experimentation as well then.
100%. It's at the heart of it.
Great. So I'd also I've been talking to you a bit, Adam, already, but you've got this nice perspective between mining and tech. So again, we've talked a bit about data strategy and how you change to digitize your environment. Is mining's digitization journey any different to other industries?
I mean, there would be. I don't really know. I think there would be quirks, and there would be things that you need to look out for. I think the basics are all there, and everything's highly transferable. But where you would spend more effort in mining would be where you'd spend less effort in, like I said, health insurance, right? I think the fundamentals will be the same. That's what we find in all the industries we work on. It's just where you put the extra effort in. But I probably want to hear from...
Well, just to add to that, I mean, mining by its very nature, the operation tends to be reasonably solid. Hands up geologists, hands up meths in the room here. So you often get these two different parts of the value chain. The guys making big rocks into small rocks, and then the people extracting, doing the alchemy and taking the metal out. Often, if you can find a solution that actually bridges that gap, I think that gets real buy-in. If you can actually overcome that silo, I think there's real benefits to be gained there and momentum. So some of the products that we work in, and I guess around the table, if you can actually really be useful to upstream and downstream in mining, I think that's a unique thing that as opposed to other industries. And by its very nature, the ore body is variable. So there's a lot of variability in what comes downstream. So having predictability in that is really, I think, beneficial. So that can gain real wins for the organization.
Absolutely. I do think that there is becoming more of an appetite to break down those silos, as we call them. And, we do see the benefits when teams work together, one team, one dream. So I guess we're hoping to replicate that, not just in the industry, but also within our products.
Yes.
We've got labels across our products, but at the same time, we're looking at ways to blend the connections between those two as well.
Yeah. Makes sense.
So, John, a question for you. When does it make sense to bring in external expertise or partners? And how can organizations ensure they're ready to collaborate effectively?
Well, I think it's a bit of self-reflection first and knowing sort of where you have capabilities internally and where you don't. Everyone has different, capabilities within their company. Some people will have people with the expertise to solve certain problems and other problems they sort of won't. So that's where I'd advise going external and getting some help.
So looking at the gaps, what you're good at, what you're missing.
Yeah. I think it's important to do some of your own, whenever some opportunity idea comes up from in the organisation, to do a bit of your own thinking about it and root cause analysis and work out what could be likely sources of the root cause of those issues. And then if you know nothing about that, then I'd suggest getting some advice in to have a look at it. Yeah. Yeah, I think the thing is if you get assigned as the project manager to a project, then you have to be the technology expert as well and know everything. And I don't know, it seems pretty unlikely you could be an expert in every single area. Like we have, to do what we do, we have experts from heaps of areas of technology as well as, we have mining engineers and geos and mets and all that as part of that sort of working together to improve our capabilities in the areas that we need to have that knowledge base to get the right outcome. So, yeah, when you've got a gap, sort of try and recognise and get some help.
Anyone else like to comment?
Yeah, I guess it's part of that, look what's out there in the market, do your market survey. There may be, that mousetrap may be already done. I mean, look at case studies and see where there's been success. If you have a problem in that area, where's it been done well? Yeah. I think any engineers in the room, let's not reinvent the wheel or start from scratch, right? So the great thing is lessons learned across the segment, and then engage with the leaders in that area. I think that makes sense. But going back to what we're saying, a lot of it's about collaboration. It's about understanding how everything works together in that ecosystem.
Actually, an interesting thing to pick on, something you both mentioned, is that when do you think you should develop in-house and when should you go external?
Well, for my thought is just go external, of course.
Go straight to it.
You're a mining company, not a software company. And look, and all joking aside, it is a tough thing to build internally, in my experience, and it's a tough journey for many organizations. One of the key things is building something and having a great solution in the first place is achievable often, but maintaining that over time, over the years, over the organizational changes, over the asset changes, that can be really tough. So I think, by definition, consulting companies or product companies, that's our bread and butter, that's our business. So we should be on the journey with you, but it's important to all play to our strengths, right? So, that's my experience, that it's been, I'm not saying that in-house solutions won't or don't work. Yes, they do. And there's been great success stories there, but in general, faster time to value can be bringing in a COTS solution off the shelf that's already proven to work in general.
The advice we give people is this product that you're intending to build, is it part of your value proposition? Is it tightly linked to what you actually do? Like you've got, I don't know what your product is, but you clearly have a product which is tightly aligned with your value proposition. So that's a great reason to build your own. If you're say, I don't know, Rio Tinto, do not go and build your own email server and email system. It is not what you do.
They might try.
Yeah. That's a stupid example, but it's not too far off the mark from what you see sometimes. And you think to yourself, well, why would you go and spend the money to build that when really it's a commodity? It's going to cost you a lot more than you think to maintain. and you could buy it very, very easily, right? We see, in the AI space, we see clients doing this all the time. They're trying to develop their own models. Why would you bother? You can there's hundreds of models out there now, thousands. For your LLMs, just use them. Yes, okay, it's not exactly what you need, but it's also not your core business.
Yeah, we actually had a really great balance of that, I think, with First Quantum Minerals when we prototyped our solution. So they have their own complete internal process around not just their ore control, but reconciliation and how that flows into mining. And it works for them because they consider that a core competency, right? That was something they were striving for. And most of it was built in Datamine scripts and macros, right? So you guys would support, I think, a large piece of it. But they knew they couldn't do that one little piece in the middle of modeling how the blast moved and mixed and diluted their ore. And specifically for it to work in that internal competency, the file structure that they needed had a lot of constraints. And so that's the product we ended up building. It's called the muckpile block model. And that uniform file format is really, I think, that perfect balance of where you can see one company would want to build a massive amount of their procedures and even scripting around what works for them, their standards, their approach. But when it comes to the bespoke pieces, vendors like myself, and I think a lot of people on this panel, need to be interoperable, right? We need to be able to customize these things to the nth degree so that the clients can have their unique style of working.
So, maybe stepping back from your own products for just a second, and an open question to the panel. Looking ahead, what do you think would be the biggest game changers in how data is used for AI in the mining industry?
Well, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So I think tying it into governance that you asked earlier, right? I think that we have this really big moment that's going to be coming soon, which is the provenance of where our metals and our commodities are coming from. We have this really interesting example at the moment with the nickel that's coming out of Indonesia, very cost effective, and Indonesia has done a great job on producing very cost effective nickel. But obviously, when you look at the holistic environment, sustainability and governance, there are a few questionabilities on whether you can actually say that the nickel produced or that could have been produced from someone like Nickel West to a very high standard, very efficiently, are they like for likes? And if you're holding the ores in your hands, the answer is yes, they're identical. And you don't know that one used a significantly higher amount of sulfur or acid or the labour conditions or anything like that. So I do think that there's a very big gap to be crossed there, which comes from interoperability of data standards and a lot of very complex solutions being solved. But AI is only one of many technologies, I think, that are going to unlock that. And really what we're going to have in, I think, the next 5 to 10 years is some kind of pull that standardization is going to be thrust upon our industry out of nowhere, and the people that have been positioned with clean data lakes and really good structures are going to be able to respond and take advantage of what I hope will be a premium on responsibly produced metals.
Yeah, and I suppose that's where ESG sort of came from as well. So I'm sure we'll see that demand coming again.
Yeah, absolutely. I think AI, I see that and concur completely. Being able to report on water utilization or savings in that space, CO2, of course, emissions, being able to track all of that and report on it accurately. I think that's going to be an important part of what we do as an industry. So I can see that as being a very much a future demand.
Jealously, I hope it's in resource estimation. There's a theory CSIRO was working on years ago called the glass earth theory, which is basically turning the earth to glass and you can see all the resources that are there. I think that's the ultimate goal. That's where we want to get to. And I think that solves a lot of the challenges that we do have around uncertainty and effectively a lot of the things that we work with as well.
Well, how's that going to go with deep underground? Because that's effectively where we're going, right? All the low-hanging fruit of open-cut giant tier 1 resources have pretty much been found. The next step is going to be significantly deep. So your glass better be very transparent to be able to see it, right? And, I think there are new technologies in this area. There's a lot of really interesting stuff with muon detection, which is brand new and maybe could break it. but I do think that there's going to inevitably be a data processing element, right? Like there's one set of innovations that's going to be data collection, like your slide structure showed, but the actual analysis of that data is equal parts, I think, part of that solution.
Well, whichever one we see, I'm sure it's going to be an exciting journey. And I think that, as we've mentioned many times, data is probably going to be key to that. So all the efforts that go into that will pay off in the future. So I'd just like to wrap it up here and thank our panelists again for their time. And thanks everyone for being here. So please give them a round of applause. Thank you.